Welcome to Mindful School Marketing, your go-to podcast for personal and professional growth.
We're school marketers, business owners, and moms passionate about connecting other school professionals with tools and strategies for success.
We love solving problems, exploring new ideas, and thinking outside the box. Let's transform your school and life starting right now. Transform your school's admissions and marketing with Inquiry Tracker, the ultimate solution for managing inquiries seamlessly. Discover how you can make your admissions process more efficient and effective with this leading solution. Welcome to Mindful School Marketing. I'm Aubrey Bursch.
And I'm Tara Clays. Today we're joined by David Madison. David is the Executive Director of the National Association of Episcopal Schools, or NAES. The mission of NAES is to serve those who serve in Episcopal schools. They provide written resources, webinars, conferences, leadership development programs, and consulting to approximately 650 Episcopal schools across the country. We're so glad you're here today. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, David.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, welcome, David. I am very excited you're here, and I think this is going to be a wonderful episode that our audience is going to enjoy. But before we dive into the heart of it, let's kick it off with what defines an Episcopal school today, and how does that identity shape its community and mission?
Sure. So one of the things that may be a surprise is that the vast majority of families that attend our schools are not members of the Episcopal Church. And so the national average is about 15% of the families that come to our schools are from the Episcopal Church, and it leaves 85% that are not. So the question that you just posed is one that we spend a lot of time working on because we have so many of our stakeholders that really aren't familiar with the nuts and bolts of Episcopal identity and what the Episcopal Church stands for. And so we have to spend a lot of time unpacking that. So the best way to do that, I think, is to start here. The Episcopal Church, because of certain things we believe about God and certain things we believe about the world, that guides how we treat each other. And that guides how we build a school community. And so if we look at something called the baptismal covenant, that kind of outlines what we understand about God. And because of those things, that drives us to two big ideas: striving for justice and peace in the world, and then also respecting the dignity of every human being. So everything that we do with regard to young people take those two ideas into consideration. Now, on a more kind of ground level, feet on the ground, nuts and bolts approach, we approach Episcopal identity by talking about four different pillars, four different expressions of this identity that we see in our schools. And the first is community. And that goes right to how we treat each other, how we respect each other, how we handle accountability, how we handle the reality that we're not all perfect and what happens when we drop the ball. How do we put the pieces back together, if that makes sense? That's the first pillar, community. Second pillar is formation. That really goes to the heart of recognizing that in Episcopal schools, academics are clearly important. Academics are central to what we do, but we also recognize the dynamic but complementary tension between faith and reason. And we recognize that we're also here to help develop a student's spiritual life and inner life. And what we do with young people goes beyond just core subjects and beyond academic performance. That leads me to the third pillar, which is formation. And that's really the nuts and bolts of what that looks like. Dr. Lisa Miller has written a lot on this subject. She wrote a book called The Spiritual Child. Her most recent book is The Awakened Brain. She'll be with us at our biennial conference in 2026 in San Francisco. But she really explores the science behind the importance of young people having a connection with the transcendent. And all of us are from different perspectives, so how we define that may be different, but making sure that a young person has a connection with God, with their understanding of the transcendent, really does prepare them for abundant life. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish in that formation pillar. And the fourth pillar is a dedication to social justice, recognizing concepts like equity, inclusion are important as we work with young people. So at the core, we're trying to prepare young people for abundant life. We're trying to recognize those core values of the Episcopal Church and respecting the dignity of every human being and striving for justice and peace. And that's really how Episcopal identity informs the work that we do with young people and with their families.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate those values. And I've worked with many Episcopal schools and find that to come through in not just in what they put out in the websites that we build for them, but just in the communication relationship that we have with them. So what a great calling you have, and thank you for sharing that. No matter what anyone's religion is, I think those core values are pretty hard to argue with, in my opinion.
So, and I mean, again, you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm extremely biased, obviously,
Yeah.
about the value of Episcopal schools. I'm a product of an Episcopal school. It was just a gift. I was able to go back to my old school and serve first as a chaplain, and then into my time at All Saints Episcopal in Fort Worth as the assistant headmaster and head of the upper school. And so not only do I think this work is really important, but it's also very personal for me because I've benefited from being part of an Episcopal school and really having those values form me and encourage me to ask big questions about how do I want to have an impact on the world. And so my hope is that all of our young people in our Episcopal schools are formed in that way and are asking that same question.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a question that we can broaden it beyond Episcopal schools, because Episcopal schools are independent schools, and that's who we speak to here on the podcast. What are some of the greatest challenges that independent schools and particularly Episcopal and other faith-based schools are facing right now?
Well, there's no shortage, is there? This is a challenging time for all schools, but for independent schools and for Episcopal schools. Specifically for Episcopal schools, I think it's making sure that we are crystal clear on what it means to be an Episcopal school and being crystal clear about Episcopal identity. NAES recently released a new set of principles of good practice that focuses specifically on Episcopal identity and the admissions process. And so I think one of the biggest challenges for us as schools is making sure that we are transparent and clear about what it means to be an Episcopal school. It is a bit nuanced. It's a little bit different from community to community. And so I think one of the biggest challenges our schools face is making sure that we understand what does it mean to be an Episcopal school in this specific context. And then how are we communicating that? How are we communicating that to stakeholders? Because we want everyone to have a good fit at their school, whether it's an Episcopal school or not. So to me, that's one of the biggest challenges that's facing Episcopal schools in the country.
That's so intriguing. I think you hit on something that not only Episcopal schools, but others, I think, are finding really challenging and really having to hone in on is that it's understanding who we are, what we do, and then communicating that effectively to stakeholders and prospective families so that you're attracting the people who understand you. And we recently did a webinar, and it was about the transparency that millennial families, as well as like this generation coming up that are having children, like what they expect, and they want that transparency. They want to know, tell me exactly what this is that I'm getting, this education. How will this impact my child? They really do want that transparency. So I think it's so intriguing that you brought that up and such a timely thing for all schools to be thinking about.
I think it's a mark of maturity for a school to recognize that, you know what, we're not the right school for everyone. And being able to have a crystal clear understanding of our mission, of our community, and then being transparent so that families have the information they need to determine, is this the right fit or not? I think that's a challenge that does transcend Episcopal schools. I think, as you mentioned, I think all independent schools are facing that and really making sure we don't fall into that marketing language and admissions material that could apply to any independent school across the country. And when you read some of the content, it doesn't really feel like we understand what are the unique elements of this particular community. All of our independent schools have wonderful, unique elements, but are we really being transparent in communicating those? I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I was listening to the news just this morning, and they were talking about independent schools and how there are wait lists in a lot of places because there's so much demand for them right now, especially those that are more affordable, but that, there isn't enough there isn't enough availability right now. So,
Right.
it is something that's popular.
Yeah, I think also, though, to think about it through the lens of kind of going back to what you said, David, about not every school is for everyone. Like, I think oftentimes schools, especially if they're struggling with enrollment, there's that very real, desire to appeal to everyone that walks through the door
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
that you're going to have to make tough decisions if you don't meet those, enrollment goals. But in the end, it doesn't serve the families. It doesn't serve your reputation in the wider community. It doesn't serve your internal community to not be completely transparent about who you are and who you aren't, because you aren't for everyone. And that's okay. I think there's truly a school out there for every student and every family. And sometimes, you're not the right school for that family, but you are for another. So I think that was really important that you said that.
Yeah, I would agree. But as we all know, the added caveat is this isn't easy. When we're trying to make those numbers, when we're trying to, I mean, budgets are budgets, and so it's a challenge. It takes a very healthy dose of bravery to be able to do some of the things that we're talking about. So I want to call that out because it's what do they say? It's simple but not easy.
Yeah, thank
the
you
the
for saying
recipe
that.
makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense, but that doesn't mean it's easy to do when we're at the end of the admission season, and sometimes things didn't unfold the way we had hoped.
Yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging that because it is absolutely true. I've seen it lived out many a times, especially for smaller schools where every enrollment matters. I mean, larger does too, but the smaller you are, like if when you don't get those two slots, that can have a direct impact on
Absolutely.
so many
And
different
it's,
things.
I have schools all across the country. And so if you are in one of those areas where the population is growing and you're blessed to have a wait list, that's one that puts you in one situation. But if you're in a city where maybe the demographics are going in the other direction, it's even more challenging on trying to make everything work.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm going to kind of switch gears here for a second because I'm thinking about all these wonderful leaders we have in schools right now. And I know you've worked closely with a cohort of Episcopal and other school leaders. So I'm wondering, like, today and like the recent conversations and work you've done with them, what are you seeing, these leaders do well or differently that others could learn from?
Well, I may sound like a broken record, but the ones that I really see doing well and thriving are the ones that are crystal clear about what makes us unique. How does our Episcopal identity inform who we hire? How does our Episcopal identity inform the strategic priorities? How does our Episcopal identity inform our admissions practices, financial aid, all of those things? So I think that's the first. The second thing I would add really is the other side of the same coin, which is being intentional about differentiating our school from other faith-based schools. And so there's such a wide variety of approaches in faith-based schools. Some of those are consistent with how we operate and how our philosophy informs us about young people, and some are not. And so a lot of families may come to the table with lots of questions and some confusion about what does it mean to attend a faith-based school, particularly if they've been part of a faith-based school that's so different from an Episcopal school. So I think the really strong leaders out there are articulating what it means to be an Episcopal school, and then are also in a nonplussed way articulating how we're different. And that's okay. And there's some things that you may be looking for that you won't find here. And that's okay, so long as we're very transparent about that on the front end. One other comment I would add, kind of from a leadership perspective, is also just being so intentional about the faculty that we hire, being so intentional about who we bring into the community to work on a daily basis with young people. And we would never say that you have to be part of an Episcopal church to be a faculty member at an Episcopal school. But coming to an Episcopal school as a faculty member, as a leader, do you fully believe in the mission? Do you fully believe in our philosophy? And can you support that in your work? So I think from a leadership perspective, that hiring, that bringing folks on, supporting them once they're on board is critically important for not just our schools, but for all independent schools.
I think that's so important. I'm so glad you touched on that point. I remember working I've worked in several independent schools, and the onboarding process of both like understanding the school prior to being hired, but then the onboarding process too is so important. Like understanding the philosophy, the mission, the heart of the school, and like really understanding the work I'm doing is having this impact and being aligned with that, right? To really believing in it does make a difference in how you're hiring and then being successful in the job that you're hired for.
Yeah. We've talked about I think effectively discussed differentiating your school and communicating your value. Are there any specific ways that you find that is done? In other words, how are you doing that messaging? How does that come across? Is it, in your materials? How are you messaging that, to be specific?
I think the best way, honestly, is on the visit day. So the materials are critically important. Obviously, and we're at a point where that website and the social media is so important. You mentioned kind of current parents and where they go for information. I mean, they're going to websites, they're going to online sources. And so making sure the school's digital footprint is consistent with the values. I think that's really an important way to communicate how the value of being part of an Episcopal school, how you can recognize that. I go back to the visit day, though. I think the way you really understand the value of an Episcopal education is by putting your feet on the campus, by meeting both the adults and the students that are part of the community, and then also by learning about our alumni, learning about the students that attend our schools, and then what they go on to accomplish in the world. So to me, that's one of the best ways for us to communicate our value, which is to come and experience it and then look at some of the folks that have experienced it and how they're doing in the world.
Yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm curious, we touched on something earlier, and that was enrollment. And I will say, like, yes, many schools probably do have wait lists, but then there are also others who are still struggling with enrollment. I'm curious, in the times we are right now with potential like recent changes to, federal and state policies, we have potential school voucher, school choice, all these things going on. What trends are you seeing across Episcopal schools when it comes to enrollment and also retention?
Well, I just want to highlight retention. I mean, I think retention is strategy number one for our schools. Making sure that when families do make that decision and commit to being part of the community, that we're working really hard to continue to highlight that value so that families understand, yeah, this is a wonderful investment that is going to be life-changing for my child in a positive way. So I think retention is a key strategy. And the schools that are doing a really great job at this have gold standard retention levels. We're seeing more. You mentioned voucher programs and school choice programs. We're seeing more and more of those unfold. I'm from Texas. The legislature just implemented some options in Texas for school choice. It's early. It's early to see what impact that's going to have. There's a very live debate right now among schools around, do we want to participate in those programs or not? And that, in my role, I get lots of calls, where they would like for me to answer that question for them, if that makes sense. And the challenge is every school has to wrestle with that. What we're encouraging schools is to make sure they fully understand the nuts and bolts of their state's program. In a place like Texas, we don't know what the nuts and bolts are yet, because once the legislature passes it, then it goes through an entire rule making process. And so we really don't fully understand it yet, if that makes sense. And so what we're advising schools to do is to make sure that they get great legal advice, fully understand what strings are attached, and then make a decision. Is this mission appropriate? Is this something that we want to participate in? Across the country, I have schools that have answered that question in either ways. I have schools that have done that analysis, done the hard homework, and have determined that, yes, this makes sense. I've had schools that have done that analysis and have determined, no, we're not going to participate. So there's some potential there, I think, to open our schools to families who may not otherwise be able to access Episcopal schools. So we want to do that. That makes all the sense in the world to me. If we can figure out a way to make sure that more families that want to be part of an Episcopal school can be part of an Episcopal school. The question is just whether or not some of these vehicles make sense. And for a lot of states, we don't know yet.
Yeah, I've heard that the paperwork can be overwhelming too, and the hoops to jump through. I'm going to go back to something that you mentioned really interesting in the very first thing you talked about, which is that a large percentage of students and families in Episcopal schools are not actually Episcopalian in their faith. And so I'm wondering what strategies you've seen schools use to engage with families who may or may not be looking for a religious school, especially in this kind of competitive market. I mean, I think the way that you present the values of your school, of Episcopal schools, is, it goes well beyond one particular faith or another, and that's why you do have that kind of a of an audience of enrollment. But I'm wondering if you have any specific strategies that you've seen used by some of the schools in these markets where people may not be looking for a religious parochial type of school, if you can share that.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's making sure that we dispel any idea that we're trying to turn your family into members of the Episcopal Church, if that makes sense. So I think sometimes there's trepidation from families that are very intrigued by what we're doing, but for whatever reason, maybe because they have a different faith background, maybe because they are not interested in there being a faith background. I think it's critically important for us to dispel what the mission of our school is, and making sure that they understand that we're not here to proselytize, if that makes sense. And that's very different from some faith-based schools. I mean, some faith-based schools are very transparent that is part of their mission, and that's fine. But that's not part of an Episcopal school's mission. So really, the first thing I like to do is again go into some of the research around what Lisa Miller has done and what other folks have done that just highlight the values that we're talking about, the activities that we're talking about, the mindfulness practices that come as part of being, in a school that has a regular chapel program, are healthy, are good for your young person. And so really trying to focus on that, I think makes a lot of sense, while also being transparent about these things will happen within the context of the Episcopal faith. That doesn't mean that you have to be part of the Episcopal faith, but you're going to hear, stories about Jesus in the same way you're going to hear stories about other religions as well. And so when we have conversations around that tends to put families a little more at ease, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of Catholic schools take that approach as well.
Yeah.
A lot of their population is also, different faiths. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's intriguing. I'm also, having worked with many faith-based schools, there's also this, I see a lot of schools that kind of struggle with maintaining who they are and their core population that is, let's say, of that particular faith, and then also serving those who aren't of the faith, but who are part of the school community. And I think some of the things you mentioned about being transparent and like understanding who we are and the things we offer and the benefits that there are for that population of students and families that might not be of your faith, but might be a good fit for your school community is really important.
And we're uniquely positioned. So if you know anything about Episcopal theology or Anglican theology, we recognize that a diversity of opinion is not a bad thing. And having different perspectives is not a bad thing. That's a healthy thing, and that's something that we want to encourage. And so the idea that we're here to force your child to believe one thing or another probably just isn't an accurate way to describe the formation pillar of an Episcopal school.
Yeah, that is so important, I think. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to ask a little bit of a different question. I mean, as we're looking into, next year and also the coming years ahead, what gives you hope or what inspires you about the future of independent and faith-based school education?
So I've been spending lots of time with this question because all of us, I think, need a little hope, a little inspiration. So two things come to mind immediately. The first thing that comes to mind are the stories that I hear from our schools about these wonderful faculty members having a transformative impact on the lives of young people. And that work continues. We don't see that work in the media as much as we see some things that are a bit disheartening. But when you spend time visiting with schools, talking with the adults who are doing this work on a day in, day out basis, you can't help but be inspired. They're doing amazing work on Episcopal school campuses all across the country. So that's one thing I'm reminded of. And that's the one challenge of my job is I do get to visit a lot of schools, but I'm not at a school campus every day. And so you have to be intentional to get out into the field and see those inspiring stories and be reminded about this is why we do the difficult work that we do, and this is why we spend so much time making sure that our programming is supporting those adults that work in Episcopal schools so that we continue that mission. The second thing I think that is so inspiring is when I get to visit with alumni, when I get to visit with young people who are out in the world, who are changing it in a positive way, and who are taking those Episcopal school values and applying them in their work with their families, wherever they have been planted. And so those two things, whenever I get discouraged, and there's plenty to be discouraged about, don't get me wrong, but when I do find myself discouraged, when I look at the stories of what our adults are doing on Episcopal school campuses, and then the finished product, what our former students are doing out into the world, I can't help but be inspired and be encouraged about the future.
Thank you. Yeah, it makes me think of Whitney Houston. I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. David, through the lens of our podcast, we talk about mindfulness and how it applies to independent school leaders. How do you define mindfulness and apply it to the work that you do with schools?
Well, when I think of mindfulness at Episcopal schools, the first thing I think of is chapel. And so we ask our chaplains to really accomplish the impossible, which is present a unapologetically Anglican chapel experience, what that's also open to people from a variety of faiths and people who have no interest in faith whatsoever. And that's a really tall order, but they're able to do it. They do it on a daily basis on our schools. So really, that's the first place I think of. I see other mindfulness practices in the classroom too. And it's interesting to see, having a moment of a minute of silence before we start with the lesson plan. And the great thing about Episcopal schools is we're able to do that. We recognize that that's a really big part of a young person's life because there's so little silence right now. I mean, they're bombarded nonstop with noise of one variety or another. And so just making sure that we can pause, be it in chapel, be in the classroom, and just make sure that we're grounded, make sure we're grounded in the present moment. The practice of gratitude, I think, is really important in being mindful, just taking a moment to recognize all of the wonderful ways that we're provided for, the wonderful blessings that we all have in all of our lives. I think that's probably one of the best mindfulness practices that young people can incorporate in their lives. So I see it not just in chapel, but also in many of our classrooms on a daily basis.
Thank you. That was wonderful to hear. I'm going to switch us to one of our favorite parts of of our segment, and that's our rapid fire questions. So are you ready for rapid fire?
I am ready for rapid fire. Let's do it.
Awesome. So exciting.
Is there a clock? Do I have a clock
Yeah.
or do I?
No,
No clock.
Okay.
All right. And now I get to start off with one of our favorite questions, which is if you could put one book as mandatory reading in the high school curriculum, what would it be?
Such a good question. So I'm going to break the rules and give you more than one. So the first one that I love is a book called Die Empty by Todd Henry. Todd is a creative, and that book focuses on how do you make sure that you accomplish the most important work that you have inside during the short time we have on Earth. And I love that book. It's inspirational. It's practical. He's really a great resource. So I put that on the list. I would also put a book called Getting Things Done by David Allen on the list. I've had the good fortune to spend a decent amount of time with Dave and his wife, Catherine. And I think some of the practices in that book are really important. There's actually a version for teens now. And so just this idea of how are we managing all the things that are coming at us so that we can be present with what we need to be present with. I think that's a critically important skill for young people to have. So I put that on the list. The third one I put on the list, and I'll stop at 3, is a book called Dear England by Stephen Cottrell. Stephen Cottrell is the Archbishop of York. And it started with a conversation he had with a barista at the train station about just why he became a priest. And it's an easy read. It's really wonderful. It reminds me a lot of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, where he is just in a very nonplussed way explaining his faith without proof texting, without going to sources that people who do not come from the Christian tradition may or may not know. And so it's just a very concise, frank explanation of his faith. He's got a great sense of humor. And so those are the 3 I'd put on the list.
I love it. I'm going to check out the first and the third. The second is one of my favorite books as well. I love that book, Getting Things Done. All right. The next question is, what is one app you could not live without?
So Spotify. I don't know. That's probably not the most exciting answer, but Spotify, both for music and for audiobooks, is really an important tool for me.
Thank you. That's awesome. I think you're not the first person who has said that. There must be a lot of Spotify fans out there.
It's a great tool, and just being able to kind of listen to whatever music I want to listen to, but then also the podcast option and the audiobook option is just a really great way to I'm doing more audiobooks. It's just it's just a great way to cover a lot of content.
Yeah, I agree. I do it when I'm unloading the dishwasher and other unpleasant
Yeah.
household tasks.
Yeah.
What are you reading right now?
So I'm working through a handful of things. I'm working through a book called How to Be Enough by Dr. Ella Hendrickson. That's a really interesting book. Just again, particularly those of us in the helping industry, in teaching, I think it's an important book for us to be grounded in, on just that, making sure that we recognize that we are enough just the way we are. That actually she starts that book with this really interesting comparison between Walt Disney and Fred Rogers, and how they accomplished their work, but their interior lives were very, very different. And so she starts with that illustration. That actually got me into a biography of Walt Disney, Neil Gabler's biography of Walt Disney. I'm reading that right now. That's been really interesting as well, to just learn more about the man that created that amazing part of American history. So that's what I'm working through right now.
Lots of great books. I'm putting those into our Goodreads list. We have an amazing Goodreads list. For anybody who doesn't know that already, we talk about it. It's linked from our website. And our last question is, what is one great piece of advice among all the others that you've given that you'd like to leave us with today?
Well, again, I'm breaking the rules. I'm going to go with two. The first, I would say, biggest piece of advice is take care of yourself. And this idea of sustainability in our work, all of our jobs, regardless of where they are in the independent school world, feel as if they are becoming larger and demanding more and more with each passing year. So I think it's really important that we figure out, how do we take care of ourselves and how do we make sure that we have sustainable lives and sustainable jobs so that we can do this for many, many years. That's one piece of advice. And we spend lots of time on that question with our new heads and with those that are discerning a call to headship. The second is for leaders. Really, really strong leaders create systems that go beyond themselves. And so I think looking at your work through that lens is critically important. What am I doing today to empower my teams so that they're not so reliant upon me, but that we can create a system where all of our team members can thrive?
Thank you so much, David. This has been really great. We really appreciate your joining us and sharing so much information, ideas, and tips. Where can people find you online?
Pretty straightforward. Episcopalschools.org is the website. And I love hearing from people. My email, also pretty straightforward, david@episcopalschools.org.
This has been an amazing kind of conversation we've had here, and I've really enjoyed learning from you and also hearing your perspective and your work with Episcopal schools.
This episode is brought to you by Enquiry Tracker. We believe that every inquiry is an opportunity, and with Enquiry Tracker, you can unlock the full potential of your school's enrollment journey.
Say goodbye to missed opportunities and hello to a streamlined admissions process that prioritizes efficiency and effectiveness. Discover the leading solution for school admissions and marketing. Visit inquirytracker.net to book a personalized demo today. That's inquiry with an E, tracker.net.
Thanks for joining us on the Mindful School Marketing Podcast.
We'd love it if you pop into iTunes and leave a review, 5-star preferred. Let us know how you like the show. It helps us improve what we're doing and helps others find us too.